Vanderpool at Borjomi Central Park. This is the mountain stream and it's home of the famous bottled Borjomi mineral water. So it's September 29, 2020. I'm going to talk about a couple of quick tips on astrology. Just strategic tips. They're certainly not all. And the first one I'm going to talk about is tips from Western astrology. Specifically, I first learned about this and then later over the years observed the accuracy. Of course, when you're using, more exact birth time with Western astrology, and I predominantly use Magi, M-A-G-I astrology, but this is a Western astrology technique, and it's when Mars will apply 60 degrees to natal Neptune. And however, with the Magi Society's astrogeometry software, using geocentric sky or heliocentric sky, which is a very important Magi astrology technique or part of the Magi astrology. Although the 60 degrees applying to natal Neptune is not looked at by Magi astrology as far as I know, in Western astrology, according to Astro's Swiss-American website out of Switzerland, that is an altered goals transit. So, for example, it often happened in my life around the time of taking flights, international flights. So, for example, in one instance, I had a Mars applying 60 degrees to natal Neptune, and it was in geocentric sky, and I was preparing to fly to Kiev, and somebody in the family had just had a pretty bad accident. Well, I don't know how bad, but it was bad enough, and it was an auto accident. And so between that and another family member reminding me of some of the negative experiences I had in that location before, I actually ended up canceling that trip out on the way to the airport, because the auto accident certainly wasn't planned for and expected, which was just a day or two before the flight was to depart, and my ticket was already booked far in advance for that, to return to Kiev, Ukraine. However, I never returned. So that's an example of an altered goal. Another example is flying on over into Russia in February 14, I believe it was, of 2009. And the altered goal transit was during that period. And one of the things that took place was that I had to stay in Germany overnight at a hotel that the airline company provided because of the weather. And I actually was at the hotel bar talking with a CEO of a major telecom company there that had attendees from the United States. They actually did business in the United States as well. That's another example of an altered goals transit. So the flight was rebooked. I ended up staying overnight in Germany and was late getting over to Russia. Another example would be I got a very good and very accurate psychic reading from the psychic twins, Terry and Linda Jameson. And it was during the beginning of Altered Goals Transit. Now here's the importance of a heliocentric transit. They're weighted in Magi astrology 3 times stronger. And though I'm talking about a Western astrology technique, specifically once again that I learned from Astro, the Swiss-American astrology site at Astro.com, the application of the 60 degrees Mars to natal Neptune results in a stronger altered goal. Another altered goal transit. Another factor involved is if you see these transits typically are about 4 or 5 days in length. And it's especially important to track them with the astrogeometry software from the Magi Society, because they're using an updated ephemeris from NASA, and that makes a difference on accuracy in terms of days or months and exactly when the transit starts and ends. That's a critically important point. The other part of this is that if the transit happens to be a length of, let's say, 12 days, it's unusual, but it can happen. So if you've got Mars applying 60 degrees to natal Neptune, which is a Western astrology technique, specifically I learned from the Swiss-American site, as I said, Astro or Astro.com. if it's in an unusual length like that, like let's say 8 days, 10 days, that's like 2.5 or 2 times stronger than the normal length, so it's going to be a bigger impact. So when I was going to the train station, going online, looking at e-tickets, looking at e-visa for Turkey, literally the borders shut down the next day under the emergency medical situation in the country I'm currently in right now, which is Georgia. And so that is another example of altered goals. And I knew that ahead because, of course, I tracked it ahead using Astro geometry software and using astrology to look at the transits and to know what to expect. And certainly, sure enough, there were altered goals. The plans were altered because my initial plan was to travel, and specifically to travel into Turkey. That the fact that the borders were shut down, the fact that flights were being restricted, the fact that flights were suddenly initially at least twice as much money in cost, and so on and so forth, it definitely altered the goal. It definitely altered the plans. It changed the once again, it was on travel. It changed the travel plan. However, on that reading I began to talk about with Terry and Linda Jameson, it was a 5 or 6 day altered goals transit, and I believe it was in heliocentric sky, but I'd have to go back and check, and that was in 2010, I believe. And hearing the things that they told me about that, some of the things I already knew about myself, and I'd actually kind of put away or not been reminded for so long, and had not returned to some of those aspects or areas or interests in my life. So I was reminded of some of my strengths and weaknesses and some of my potentials, and I know what they had told me was accurate. They are truly gifted, and so what I had done is I had changed my goals. I had altered my goals based on those reminders, based on some things that they saw in my life and in my personality and my interest and my skill set that I had either forgotten or put away or not returned to for, a period of 10, 20 years, that kind of thing. So that's another example. Another situation where the strength of the altered goal transit can be, like I said, if it's in heliocentric sky, that alone. And you won't see that using Western astrology typically. You have to have astrogeometry software and look in heliocentric sky, and when it's there, it's 3 times stronger. We weigh it 3 times stronger as a transit in heliocentric sky. So if also, let's say it's a month period of time, 3 to 4 weeks, and if you've got an altered goal transit, Mars 60 degrees applying to natal Neptune in geocentric sky, and within that same, 3 to 4 week 2 to 4 week window of time, you've got a heliocentric altered goal transit, then it's more impactful, it's stronger, and it's a bigger change in plans. So another example, I had been spending a lot of time with a close friend, their family, and then we had plans to go and travel to a particular country and start business there. And what took place is that everything changed up quite dramatically, and so those plans were dramatically changed. We actually shelved those plans altogether. So that is another example where you're headed in one direction, you're planning, you're taking steps, you're making these goals and pursuing them, and then you have a sudden change. But it's more impactful if it's either in heliocentric sky. We weigh it 3 times stronger. Any transit in Magi astrology. But I'm not talking about a Magi astrology technique here in terms of the actual specific transit that I'm talking about. But the same I've noticed is true in real life, in application, even though I'm using a Western astrology technique, but tracking it in the most accurate astrogeometry, Magi astrology, Magi society software. So if you will see the transit longer than the usual 4 to 5 days, if it's 10 days, for example, whether it's in geocentric or heliocentric, that too will be much stronger. It will be stronger in its influence and its impact on altering your goals or your plans. Another indicator is if, as I mentioned, if it's in both geocentric and heliocentric sky, and it is within a 2 to 4 week window in proximity to each other. That also makes it more impactful on a person's life. So those are just a few examples of how they've played out in my life. And the one back in the end of March this year, around the 21st through around April 1st, it was exceptionally long in length. And I knew that was coming in, but the speed in which they moved, closed the borders was literally the next day before I could get down or even I always was so close to applying for the e-visa. I already had it on the website. I already had the fees checked and the tickets for the. I was going to take the train, I think, at one point, and then a taxi at another point. So I had everything lined up, was ready to go, and the very next day, everything was closed. So that was also, as I mentioned, when the flights were doubled in price because of the current global crisis. So that is an example of a longer Mars 60 degrees applying to natal Neptune transit, which is an altered goals transit. And that's how your plans can change, to where you're literally planning to travel and go, and then suddenly those plans are switched up quite dramatically. And to some extent, in terms of one direction or part of the plan, impossible to reconcile. There's no way to go around part of those plans. In other situations, it was a matter of my choice, my decision, but impacted by major events in life, such as a family member having an accident, for example, an auto accident, or the storm in Germany that caused me to be there for an extra day and have a delayed flight into Russia, for example, or as I mentioned, the very great psychic reading from Terry and Linda Jameson, the psychic twins, that caused me to readjust, have a re-evaluation of where I was heading in life and where my strengths and weaknesses lie, and skill sets and things like that, and reminded me of things that I knew to be true as far as those were concerned. So there was changes in goals and plans and strategy. So that is a very important technique, and it's also significant if that transit is running around the same time or after especially a harsh heartbreak transit, or a looped heartbreak transit, or a looped harsh heartbreak transit, or just a heartbreak transit in general, singular or looped, in Magi astrology, using that Magi astrology technique of identifying those transits. But if you see an altered goal transit during or after that especially, or maybe even before, you can get some idea as to what that energy may play out to be as you're moving along, as you're going down the road of life, and you know that those energies are going to come into play, and when can help you to be not so taken off guard, or to be ready to better prepare strategically and with planning and maybe even alternative plans for such energies that will influence or play out on your life. Another technique can be the sun, the Jupiter square sun, which can involve legal issues, or that kind of almost overdoing it in areas that can risk legal involvements. And again, if those all run together, or if even that Jupiter square natal sun runs at the same time, a heartbreak transit runs, then you could find yourself in the middle of a marriage breakup, a separation, and legal issues involved in that, or a divorce itself, that kind of thing. So those are just different ways to look at astrology strategically, and exact transits that also, when they're running at the same time together or near each other in proximity in a window in time, that's how you can know that those kind of issues can come up. And knowing that and seeing that in advance can help you to be more prepared strategically, and you won't be caught off guard so much, or the shock value because, like, for example, when I'm here and then the borders closed down back at that time, and my plans were changed up, and because I was considering the flights too, and looking at the timing and the different possibilities with that, and with everything changing so quickly in the world in regards to travel, especially international travel, I was more than prepared. I was very much not surprised, even though it was a historical, very unusual, very big, very impactful thing, and it was happening in countries around the world. I was fully not completely surprised, because not only did I understand the situation more or less, but I understood exactly that the altered goals could come in, and I was prepared to try to navigate or accept or navigate in with that energy, which exactly played out. So even though I knew that in advance, even though I was moving very quickly, I was watching the developments as they took place. I was watching various sources of news. I had alternative plans ready to pursue in each case, looking at the various factors involved in those plans and so on. But even though those things were in play, the altered goal transit still played out in real life, and exactly on that timing. So, as I mentioned, there are situations where you can make that choice and you've altered your own goal or plan. There are other situations where no matter your decision or your ability to decide about the thing, those things become impossible to proceed in the plan that you had. So you have to come up with an altered plan or a workaround or a different direction altogether. So that gives a little bit of background on this. This video's been at the right 17 minutes on this timing of the viewfinder that I'm looking at on this video, that I'm looking at, the device that I'm recording on. So that's a pretty good, important tip. That is a Western, again, that's a Western astrology technique. That is not a Magi astrology technique. However, I have told how to track it and how to see when it is more impactful, when it's longer in length, instead of the 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 days in length, if it's twice that, or 12 days, for example, or when they are close in proximity. One's in geocentric sky, one's in heliocentric sky. Heliocentric sky is something that we are using, very heavily in Magi astrology, and is a very valid and very important, not only horoscope reading technique or Magi astro chart reading part of the reading or chart in the reading of someone on astrology, but also a predictive astrology, a Magi predictive astrology technique. It is so important, that chart in Magi astrology, the heliocentric chart. So, but then again, when they're in close proximity, especially within a 2 to 4 week period. So, and heliocentric sky, if they're there, they're going to be 3 times stronger. As are all astrology transits are in heliocentric sky in Magi astrology. They are way 3 times stronger. So that information, if it's out there, I haven't seen it in this way, in this concise and this thorough way, but it's an important technique, especially if you're a traveler, especially if you're an international traveler, but especially if you're interested in knowing and learning astrology, or simply applying astrology in a practical way to your life. I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Michael Vanderpool, astrologer Michael Vanderpool. I have a website you'll find in the link below. I'm adding this to my playlist, so be sure to check out that playlist. If you haven't seen it, that link will also be in the description below this video if you're seeing it on YouTube for sure. So this is Michael Vanderpool at Borjomi Central Park, September 29, 2020. And I've been doing astrology since 1999, and I joined the Magi Society and got the membership in 2007. And I have about at least 30 plus videos in my playlist, so be sure to check them out. And this one obviously is if you're watching this in 2020, is with fresh, new, important information on strategic astrology, I like to call it. But really it has to do with planning and being able to look ahead and not being taken so off course or being overwhelmed by such major changes in plans. You know, a lot of people, flight cancellations or, you know, dealing with you know, emergency medical law in a foreign country and options change and borders closed, or whether it's, you know, if you're dealing with a situation with a marital separation or divorce, or you've got business plans with partners going on and things like that, and suddenly something changes, you can look ahead and see whether it's a negative thing or more positive thing, or just maybe not even so much of that. It's just the idea that where you're headed, whether it's on travel, whether it's a consultation and new information, dramatically new information, or whether it's business planning, marriage, any of those kinds of things. But especially travel, I've noticed. These plans on those transits, and I've given 3 different ways to lay out and to discern how impactful, how heavy they are, and given some examples on exactly how they play out in my life, and I hope that helps you as someone that is looking at astrology or applying astrology to your life. Thanks and have a nice day. Thanks for watching. Or an evening or night, wherever you may be, or whatever time you may be watching.